what better way to kick off the Halloween season than with Snuff? Hang on. Yeah, that is what I wrote. If you don't know, Snuff has a few connotations to it, seeing as there are about 3 instances the word can be used in. 2 are connected to filmmaking, while 1 is not. In the context of filmmaking, there are 2 terms to look at: snuff films and the snuff genre. Snuff films are essentially homemade movies capturing the real-life murders of actual people. These are what I will call the real deal. There's a difference between snuff films and recordings of executions and other incidents like what would be common on LiveLeak. Snuff films are made solely for financial gain, or more commonly, entertainment purposes. Because of that, this wraps around to the 3rd context the word is used in, but I will go over that after I'm done explaining the other half of the word's usage in film speak. The snuff genre is entirely fictitious. These are movies made about the subject. Think Cannibal Holocaust or Guinea Pig. I mean, Charlie Sheen did mistake Flower of Flesh and Blood as depicting someone's death. Other video nasties would, of course, be a Serbian film and August Underground. Rounding out this lesson, the 3rd place snuff is generally used in is in a fetishistic context. People who get off to either simulated or, more monstrously, actual murder have a snuff fetish. Of course, this is where you could go down a rabbit hole detailing the differences between the varying types. Someone with a fascination with Guro is on a different wavelength than a person who cranks it to Succubus Prison House of Lewd Demons every few months. I would have a non-alcoholic beverage with the latter and glass the former, but, and as many of you look up Succubus Prison House of Lewd Demons, Muska, best girl, as it is tonight's homework, I have a game to get to, so class is dismissed. I hope I wasn't light on the levity last section, because this one is going to be a doozy, mainly because I get to talk about actual crimes. Can I get one more look at Muska, please? Thank you. Manhunt has major ties to the Grand Theft Auto series. That shouldn't be a surprise, seeing as the developer was Rockstar North. This is the team that brought to life Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City. It is because of them that we have the sandbox-styled crime game genre, or at least what it is now. More developers choose to emulate what was done in 3, Vice City, and San Andreas than, say, 1 or 2, or even games like Mafia. Manhunt and Grand Theft Auto 3 both started development around the same time, the mid-90s, both using the same engine, Criterion Software's Renderware engine, but while many at DMA designed what Rockstar North was originally called at the time, were pumped to work on 3 so they could get to Manhunt, other parts of Rockstar, mainly the publishing branch, didn't look at the game so favorably. Former Rockstar employee Jeff Williams explained to GamesRadar that it may sound surprising, but there's almost a mutiny at the company over that game. It was Rockstar North's pet project. Most of us at Rockstar Games wanted no part of it. We already weathered plenty of controversy over GTA 3 and Vice City, we were no strangers to it, but Manhunt felt different. With GTA, we always had the excuse that the gameplay was untethered. You never had to hurt anybody that wasn't a bad guy in one of the missions. You could play completely ethically if you wanted, and the game was a parody anyway, so lighten up. Irony seeing that all you kill in Manhunt are bad people ranging from bigots to sexual deviants, but sure. Despite my comments, the violence between GTA and Manhunt is wholly different. While GTA could be brutal, the series was always over the top, layering its violence with humor. To use an example, I don't so much as remember the following car chase in San Andreas as I do Big Smoke's order that happens before it. There is a playful attitude with Grand Theft Auto. Manhunt, on the other hand, would drop any parody elements, shoving violence into the forefront. That's what happens when you're inspired by the likes of The Most Dangerous Game and a little bit of The Running Man. There were no laughs to be had unless you like bellowing out at the audacity of how far some of the kills went. In saying this, Manhunt would be taking place in the same universe as GTA, but in a different city. While Claude's journey saw him stay in Liberty City, death row inmate James Earl Cash would be fighting for his life on the streets of Carcer City for the enjoyment of a mysterious benefactor going by the title of the Director. Going back to Jeff, Manhunt, though, just made us all feel icky. It was all about the violence, and it was realistic violence. We all knew there was no way we could explain away that game. There was no way to rationalize it. We were crossing a line. I feel this is where I should mention, though Jeff's quote already brought it up, that GTA as a series was a controversial one stemming from the ongoing legal debates surrounding video games and their depictions of violence. Good old Jack Thompson makes his reappearance on the show. I suppose, however, I should go back to the start of this scandal, seeing as what was happening to GTA was essentially the continuation of the 93 hearing spearheaded by Joe Lieberman. To not go too down the hole, Lieberman thought video games were being marketed to children with violence in mind, leading to the creation of the ESRB. That's all you need to know, as it's something that would require its own video to cover, as the 93 hearings were partially out of moral grandstanding on the senator's part, partially out of regulating an industry that didn't regulate itself on the developer's part. 93 had its ties to Sega and Nintendo's rivalry solely because of their versions of Mortal Kombat being so different. That's not even going into the mischaracterization of Night Trap by the government, the moral panic surrounding guns, and how lethal enforcers got caught in the crossfire, or the growing market for a mature audience that games were getting. Like with the console wars, it's a topic that is well worth your time, but I'm not here to discuss it in its entirety. Just know that basically what happened in 93 repeated for GTA 3, many people speaking out about how its depictions of violence were not suitable for anyone. Some psychologists were even parading that point around, to which all I can say is, wow, when did we as a species mistake fiction for reality? For as much as I'd love Musica to drain my entire essence out of my body, I don't know how that would work with this gelatinous form, as I haven't mastered body mimicry yet, and I'll respawn anyway. Even I know the difference between fantasy and reality. Most people do. Anyone who gets on that soapbox that Thompson, Lieberman, or others have pushed onto the stage gets it into their head that we don't. They attribute a thought process that is never there, that video games teach us to be violent. Well, if that's the case, wouldn't the same go for movies or books? If anything, news coverage of mass shootings typically cause more to happen. Blaming fiction is a mindset that I find truly alien, as to me it shifts the blame from responsible people to a scapegoat that has no connection. Case in point, the murder of Aaron Hamill and the shooting of Kimberly Bed by William and Josh Buckner. The Buckners took .22 rifles from their home and fired out into Tennessee's I-40. Caught after the act, the two blamed GTA for their actions, with Jack Thompson citing this in his later lawsuit aimed at Take-Two. But doesn't that come across as not wanting to own up to one's actions? I didn't want to murder 25 people. The ghost bishops from Mars made me do it. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that's how it comes across. Instead of asking why the Buckners had unsupervised access to firearms, how they were like socially, or even if there were red flags leading up to the incident, all anyone wanted to do was blame a game played by a million other people who decidedly didn't kill anyone. It's almost as if these issues are on a personal level, not formed because someone played a game. Yeah, but fixing those issues would require tackling real-world problems when it's so much easier to pat yourself on the back by paying lip service. Before I can completely crush your faith in humanity, Manhunt was announced at E3 in 2003, with the game scene released later in the year on PlayStation 2 come November. Re-releases would be issued in 2004 for Xbox and Windows, with more on PlayStation 3 and 4. While GTA 3 caught flack, Manhunt went relatively unscathed in America, outside of slightly reigniting the violent video games debate. That's because the rest of the world, mainly Europe and Australia, was banning it outright. In Germany, all copies of it were confiscated under violation of representation of violence, as the ruling court said that it portrayed killing humans as fun. I mean, if you want to call ones and zeros human, you can. You'll get a leg up when our robot overlords take over, but something tells me you'll be put to the wall as well. Australia originally rated the game for people 15 and older before refusing to classify the game a year after its release, but that's normal for that laughable continent, now is it? New Zealand declared the game objectionable near the end of 2003, with ownership being considered an offense. And though I didn't mention it, Canada rated Manhunt as a movie, restricting it to adults only. What's funny is that I can think of a much more harrowing experience than Manhunt that was released in 2003. Saya. Of course, this is an unfair comparison, as Manhunt was mainstream while Saya was niche. It's just funny how the surface wasn't even scratched. You think you've seen fucked up? I'll show you fucked up. Manhunt was also blamed for a murder like with GTA 3, but both the police and presiding judge not only confirmed how little the connection was between the crime and the game, the judge himself said that all responsibility laid with the perpetrator. Still didn't stop Jack Thompson from milking tragedy like the uncaring charlatan that he was and is. Before I tell you which version I played, I have to weave a story before your very eyes, as Dear Lord, I did not know what I was getting myself into. Not with the game, I knew about Manhunt, though I hadn't played it. Part of the reason why I chose it was because of its cult status and the fact that I mentioned last sentence. With LTA, I want to play both games that I enjoy as well as games I've never played. What I didn't know what I was getting myself into was probably the most frustrating time I've ever had with a game. I mentioned previously in Max Payne that Max Payne 2 was a struggle to get working. It was, but once it ran, it always did. See, before going into Manhunt, I knew the Steam version was a crock of shit. The infamous gate glitch is a bit of a meme for a reason. That's why I figured, hey, I'll play the PlayStation 2 version emulated. Rockstar's already taken my money as I did purchase a legal Steam copy. Boy, was I in for a shock when I ran into a glitch in the opening seconds of the game. During the introduction to the hoods, the CCTV footage would play, then immediately cut to a black screen. The cause of this? Skipping the opening cinematic. Okay, I was testing to make sure the game works, so I'll watch the cutscene when recording. PlayStation 2 Manhunt ran perfectly from then on until reaching Fueled by Hate. That's when the second glitch happened. Stuck crane. Again, researching it, this glitch is common and all you need to do to fix it is fiddle with some emulator settings. Great, I'm finished with the level, on to the next one. CCTV black screen again. This time with no fix. Okay, fuck, looks like I'm going to the Steam version. Luckily, there is an easy Manhunt fix that patches all the issues with the game. Fantastic, all I need to do is set up controller support and suffer the torments of the obsidian pit which no light pierces. To even get controller support for Manhunt, you need to use Steam Big Picture Mode. Anyone who's ever had the much maligned misfortune of using Big Picture Mode knows that when using a controller for it, your control stick moves the mouse and the buttons act as keyboard and mouse buttons. What that means is that during recording, there would be times that my controller would register as me clicking outside the game window. Likewise, this sometimes caused the game to crash, or I would accidentally close the game. Don't think of using a controller for Manhunt, you'll hate yourself. Scratch that, just having two monitors will cause the issue regardless whether you are using a mouse or not. Look into cursor lock as it allows you to stop your cursor from drifting over to your other monitor if you have one. Then my saves disappeared, though this was an issue with my ransomware protection that I easily sorted out. I won't include this as part of the bad as that would be unfair to the game itself, though I will say, like with Max Payne, I wish there was an updated version or remaster, but fuck if Take-Two will ever let that happen. Instead, they'd much rather sue fan projects that require you to own their games, but I'm pretty sure you've seen the tweet from Civvy. With the stage set, the version I played was the Steam release. Our tale opens up with the supposed execution of death row inmate James Earl Cash. Supposed as he doesn't die, instead he's been handpicked by a figure only known as the director for the time being to participate in a series of scenes. What kind of scenes? Snuff film scenes.
That's my boy. Get your teeth into them. Just take your time, Cash. I see a few hoods around these vans. Sorry, I should explain. Each gang has their, let's just call it, their thing. These guys call themselves the Hoods, but none of that should bother you. As far as you're concerned, they're meat. Okay, on you go.
All across Carcer City, Cash is dumped off by his handler to fight his way through gang-infested streets, all hired by the director as film extras. Despite insurmountable odds, Cash proves to be a wily sort, stepping up to each challenge the director throws at him, though he does end up having to watch his family get executed regardless if he manages to save them all or not.
You must understand, Cash. I could never let them go. Where were your family when you were facing your final moments in the chamber anyway? You've left your old life, your old self. I'm all the family you need now.
Including surviving an act of betrayal. Free from the director's sick game and murdering one of his right-hand men by the name of Ramirez, Cash ends up running into a journalist who explains to him that the director is Lionel Starkweather, disgraced film director and ruler of Carcer City.
Pull over! Pull over! I've seen your face before.
Get off of me! I'm a reporter! I was at your execution!
Keep talking.
I've been following Starkweather's operation for months.
Who's Starkweather?
The guy that's been talking you through this whole circus of death? Look, I've got all I need to expose that sick bastard, but he's definitely on to me now. So I have to get back to my apartment, collect my material, and get out of town before I become another one of Starkweather's extras.
You can bring him down? This Starkweather?
Absolutely. This is gonna make my career.
Okay, let's go.
Huh?
To your apartment. Drive!
While she busts the story wide open to the public, Cash sneaks into Starkweather's estate, eviscerates his personal guard, including a former star by the name of Pigsy, and gives Starkweather the finger by way of a chainsaw to the gut.
I say, Cash, as I say. We can make a sequel, Cash. You and me together. Think, Cash, think. Don't blow your one big chance here. Fuck you, Cash! Fuck you! Cash, I made you!
The story ends with a news report revealing all the wrongdoings of Starkweather and Carcer City's chief of police to the public. Huh. There isn't really much to say here as Manhunt's story takes a backseat. There's also a minuscule amount of it, with the only twist, if you can call it that, being Starkweather's betrayal and how deep his operation runs. Not only does he own Carcer, he has manhandled the cops into spreading his snuff empire. Besides that, every character might as well be a cardboard cutout with a label. Cash is our unscrupulous hero, Starkweather is our mysterious mentor turned villain, and the reporter is a deus ex machina that gets Cash from one location to the other, as well as reveal all the wrongdoings of Starkweather to the public. From a pure writing standpoint, there is no legitimate reason to care for Cash. I don't doubt that to be purposeful, seeing as you're not exactly supposed to root for him, but why give him a name then? Why shove his meaningless family into the fray then kill them off regardless what he does? If it's to show how dire things are, we already learned that from the first screen. By giving him a title, much like how Starkweather goes mostly by one for the entire game, you alleviate these issues as for all intents and purposes, Cash is a player insert. Granted, I will say my observations are taking into account what the game was going for, as Manhunt having such a loose story isn't a negative, it's a means to an end. Manhunt's story does what it needs to do, which is facilitate its gameplay, and that is all I could ask for. Story is important to some games, others not. This is a case of the latter. I will say that it's pretty funny out of all the characters Cash kills, Starkweather puts up so little of a fight. I take it as a critique on people who enjoy watching real-world violence but can't stomach to engage in it themselves. He built an empire of snuff, yet cowers in the corner when all his defenses are gone. The horrid veneer is gone, leaving only a sad man incapable of doing anything. It says a lot that the blithering animal man Pigsy is more dangerous than Starkweather in a physical confrontation, despite the fact that the director is the one running the show. What truly makes Manhunt a rememberable game outside of parts of its gameplay is the length it goes to when it comes to its presentation. Grungy wouldn't be the best word to describe it. Imagine the worst dive bar bathroom you've ever been to, the scum-encrusted tile, the infestation of rats and cockroaches, the liberal usage of profanity grafted onto the walls. Get that pure image in your head, then make it 10 times worse, and add a backing track of someone yelling out bloody murder as they get ripped open. That is what every level in Manhunt is.
Damn chicken shit hiding in the goddamn bra!
While the stages visually can be a bit bland, as most take place on a series of streets or abandoned buildings, though props go to the zoo, the hospital, and Starkweather's estate, the oppressive atmosphere in each level is palpable.
See the turret?
You truly feel like a loner out of your gourd as you try to navigate your way into and past the depths of Carcer, all while trying to stay alive and entertain some wacko who's filming every misdeed you will carry out. There's a reason for why Manhunt has a grain filter to not only lull you into the muck, but to get across that it's like you're witnessing, or rather playing, a snuff film. Take that into account with all the harsh jump cuts that the game does to either objects in the scenery or when Cash executes a hunter. Manhunt has such a strong identity solely because what it's trying to simulate is something truly repugnant. The game doesn't cut away from the violence to mask it, it zooms you right in so you can see what mayhem you're causing in gory detail. And gory is the best way to describe it. You feel the weight of your actions when you see the brains of some unlucky hunter splattered across a wall a few feet next to you, or you see the remains of what was originally their skull. There's such a no-nonsense brutality to the way things are done in Manhunt, and the animations get that across. While most of the animations in the game are fairly decent with a wide variety, I don't know if some are from GTA 3, though if I were to hazard a guess, I would say the walk or run cycles were. The highlights are the executions. I could point to a number of them saying that they are the ethos or design philosophy of Manhunt because of how realistically savage they are. Cash isn't a hero, he's a butcher that is only so strong. So when I see him take a number of swings to hack off someone's head, there's a bit of wincing to be had. It's a slow, deliberate process that's horrific. What emphasizes this is how quiet the game can be. There are musical stings within Manhunt, such as when an enemy is looking for or has found Cash, but not for when you're killing a hunter. Mostly what you hear are the wails of pain coming from the hunters you slaughter, a heartbeat warning you that one is nearby, and Starkweather's crude remarks. While from the get-go you nor Cash should trust Starkweather, I love how the game gets across how despicable he is. Every few executions or so, Starkweather will bathe in the blood of Cash's murders, telling him to commit more, or basically saying that he's using the footage as wanking material.
You're really getting me off, Cash.
Going even further, he berates Cash for idling for too long or getting caught too many times, as if any fun that he will have is dependent on Cash. It helps that Brian Cox provides a delightfully devilish performance.
Okay, there are some more of these shitheads hanging around the exit. Give me some grade A, honest-to-God gore, and you'll be buzzing through the door.
If anything, the only weak part of the presentation is the voice work, and that's because the only voice lines you hear in the game comes from enemy chatter. Most of it I won't repeat, but it is decidedly aggressive to get across that the hunters Cash deals with aren't good people. The enemy voice lines are distinct though, as each gang has their own flavor, ranging from the bigoted skins to the mixture of Latino nomenclature and perverse rhetoric that represents the innocents.
We can talk about this. Daddy understands. Just don't fucking mouth! Uh-oh. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? Time for Daddy.
Manhunt is a stealth game that slowly but surely shapes itself into a third-person shooter. From the get-go, you can play on two difficulties: Fetish and Hardcore. Unlike in a few previous games, there are a menagerie of differences between the two. On Fetish, players have access to a minimap that acts as a poor man's Soliton radar. For budgetary reasons, it doesn't give you enemies cones of vision, only what direction they are looking at. It does show what alert state they are in, green being unalerted, orange being actively looking, and red being alert and trying to kill you, as well as how much noise is being created at a given time. Hunters are a bit weaker on Fetish, though they will still easily kill Cash in a direct fight, and they also react a bit slower. On Hardcore, the minimap is removed and enemies are tougher, but the main change between Fetish and Hardcore though is how many stars you can earn on each difficulty. The player can only earn 4 stars on Fetish, 3 for their show ranking, 1 for time, while on Hardcore it is possible to earn all 5 stars. Not to go away, but as a tangent, stars unlock extras with the incentive to do well being extra levels. Speaking of the levels, they are quite sprawling with a plethora of usable items to find in them, but the game is mostly linear. There aren't a lot of alternative paths to get through a stage, though there are some alternate objectives like 2 flavors of escort mission and some boss stages that are, well, one of them is good to say the least, the other not so much, and most of the time Cash is railroaded into having to deal with either simple puzzles or, more commonly, groups of enemies. Hunters, as they are called, because Cash is more comparable to Prey when it comes to being a video game protagonist. Make no mistake, though Cash does have a simple moveset including the ability to walk, run, sneak, and do combos of 2 different strengths, in honorable combat, Cash will lose most of the time. Even against a single hunter, Cash will be thoroughly outmatched, so taking on a group in close quarters combat is suicide. However, while hunters have numbers, Cash has the shadows. While Cash is standing in any place capable of concealing him, hunters will not find him unless they actively bump into Cash while they are searching for him. In saying this, I did have instances where I was found despite being in the shadows, though I do not know what caused this. From the shadows or even out of them, Cash can employ one of the best abilities in his lineup: wall knocking. While either saddled up against a wall or applicable surface or by standing next to it, Cash can hit the wall to generate noise in an attempt to lure enemies over. This isn't the only way to generate noise, as running, walking over some surfaces, throwing lures, pushing certain environmental objects, or falling from any distance does so as well, but it is the most consistent. Enemies lured by a wall knock typically investigate the area the noise was made from before returning to their path, though not every enemy is the same. Some stay in place, not reacting to the wall knock, while others will check out the sound before hastily heading back to their post. The second option is the game's way of putting you on the offensive. Each gang also has their own personal threshold for buffoonery, as the hoods get more easily tricked than, say, the police. The main purpose of the wall knock, besides separating large groups, is to get a hunter to turn their back towards Cash. For as useless Cash is in most conventional fights, he has the capability of instantly killing an enemy he gets the drop on. This is the execution system. Whenever Cash is close enough to the back of an enemy, he can perform an execution varying in 3 levels: normal, violent, and gruesome. Which one is determined by how long Cash charges his execution, with a targeting reticle changing color, white for normal, yellow for violent, and red for gruesome, to show which one he will perform. There is a bit of risk and reward to this system, as though the more vicious executions are vividly animated and award more stars at the end, they take longer to perform, thus meaning Cash has a higher chance to be spotted while he's trying to do one. Lower tier executions are much safer but award less points and might not have certain properties, such as with the Wire's gruesome kill awarding the player a head lure. Executions can only be done from the back and only if Cash has a melee weapon on hand. Items come in a few varieties, those being green, yellow, blue, red, and consumables. Like with Max Pain, Cash chews down painkillers to keep his pain going, though there is nothing to replenish stamina, you just have to stop running to let that bar recharge. Saves are also under this, as every so often you'll find a checkpoint in the form of a VHS tape. Collecting one saves Cash's stage progress, so if you are ever to die, something that is common in the later chapters, he respawns where the tape was. Going into the pause menu, however, allows you to create a manual save in case duty calls or other real-world events take precedence, such as noisy neighbors who thought it'd be funny to enter an abandoned movie theater for a laugh. Moving on to the lineup of usable items, each color represents what type it is. Yellow are lures. These are throwable objects meant to act as a much more versatile wall knock, but outside of a few instances, I never really used them. They can smash windows and are useful in trying to distract enemies that have seen Cash, but I rarely use them as an enemy lure. Green items are one-offs. These are your plastic bags and glass shards. They are used up when an execution is performed with them, however, green item executions make the least amount of noise. Blue items are smaller weapons and arms. They don't break when used to execute an enemy, but they generate a bit more noise. Red items are two-handed weapons, creating the most amount of noise when executing, but have more violent executions. Cash can only carry one of each item type, and though for most the only difference between items is animation, some are clearly better than others. Cans and heads are better lures than bottles because they don't break, and firearms are better than any melee weapon. Firearms? Yes, firearms. Weapons are classified by two typings, melee and guns. While melee weapons are poor in upfront encounters, they have access to executions. Guns, meanwhile, are loud and don't have access to the mechanic, but a headshot for most is an instant kill. Because guns are in play, the wall saddling mechanic does give way to a basic cover system. Guns themselves have their own consumable, that being ammo boxes, but it's not universal. Moving on to the enemies, besides changing theming every few levels, most come in two varieties: stabby men and shooty men. Stabby punchy men try to run over to Cash to kill him, while shooty men do it from a range. Most enemies, when they spot Cash, give chase, forcing him to generally run away and hide, though the shadows can do this. If a hunter sees Cash dip into them, they will still see him. That does mean giving hunters the slip can take a bit of time based on Cash's surroundings. A key component to every enemy is the amount of damage they can do. We are talking max pain levels of damage capabilities matched with the same reaction time. While this isn't too bad with melee hunters, the ones with guns are... well, I'll leave that for later. When completing a stage, the player is ranked on time and their performance, which then earns them stars. However, just reaching a stage unlocks it in the scene selection menu. What this game ultimately gets right is its atmosphere and tone, the feeling of grim and grimy grittiness grating at your psyche. For as much as Manhunt is a traditional horror game, as getting caught in Manhunt can lead to tense and stressful games of hide and seek, and while I'm bad at stealth, I relatively enjoyed my time through the animal cages and grounds for assault because of how open the space was and how tenacious the enemies can be when both hunting and searching for Cash. Manhunt does have a psychological angle to it. One of the aspects of the presentation I failed to mention is that when you first start off, Starkweather guides you into your executions. Whenever you are in range to do one, he'll pipe in saying for you to do it. As the game goes on, however, you start to hear less and less of him until he never directs you at all. He relegates himself to making his comments or making fun of Cash for getting caught. I did say that video games don't teach people to be killers. That is still true. What Manhunt is exploring is how one can be prodded into violence to the point that they think nothing of it. Now, Cash as a character probably doesn't need Starkweather's encouragements, but look at it from the bigger picture. Starkweather offers freedom in the form of participating in a few snuff films. With his guiding voice, he eases his victims into committing atrocities to the point that they don't think about it or they start to actively enjoy it. Starkweather molds and shapes those he guides into either future snuff film stars or extras meant to be disposed of. All because he offers that tiny bit of freedom. The chance that, hey, what you're doing now is fucked up, but it'll all be behind you when you're finished here, right? That's when Starkweather adds caveat after caveat. It's a way to mentally snap his stars into compliance or insanity. The fact that all the hunters aren't good people is a safety net. People would think twice about slaying entirely innocent people, and going from Starkweather's ideas of fun, he wouldn't get any entertainment out of it as there is no struggle. But when every other person on the street is either a money-hungry opportunist, a raging racist, a bloodthirsty weekend warrior, a coked-up satanic gangbanger, an overweight violent degenerate, or a vicious psychopath, you wouldn't think twice about massacring the whole lot of them. What are they to you? You have the possible moral high ground. It's not like anyone would miss such people. So go ahead, take that knife and hack their heads off. See how scary that framing is? You sink to lower depths than the people trying to kill you. You start to justify your actions to the point that you don't see the monster you've become, that Starkweather wants you to become. The only thing you're thinking about is survival, which comes haphazardly at the edge of an axe, leaving no time for questioning. Then, at the end of the day, you're just another cash cow for Starkweather that he'll either cage up in his attic or kill on the spot. Human suffering or lives mean nothing to him besides profit or amusement. Who do you think hired the hunters? Why do you think they're called hunters in the first place? It's such an insidious design Starkweather's game has. No matter what, he wins with little recourse to be had against him. With his public standing, he can tarnish the reputation of anyone and separate himself from the actions of those in his games. But when push comes to shove, Starkweather is literally no one. A single hood, skin, war dog, innocent, or smiley are more threatening than he is. For all his pomp and circumstance, Starkweather is a truly pathetic man, only capable of barking orders like the terrified dog that he actually is. With my accidental analysis over, boy, you bet it's fun to hack up any and all that get in your way. Part of this has to do with the game's sharp range of sound, whether from the pointed usage of it, such as when wall knocking, bumbling over an environmental object, or any of the stinger tracks, or lack thereof. Manhunt's soundscape does its best to enhance the tension. One of its best usages is when enemies are chasing Cash, especially when they are far away. It's as if the music itself is the thumping footsteps heading heading right to where you're at. Then there are the various execution noises. The sharp slice of a butcher's cleaver into soft meat, the crack of a bat turning someone's head into a watermelon, the gasping of someone suffocating from a bag or wire. If the horrific acts that Cash can commit don't get you in their brutal glory, the sounds will. In a way, they stick with me much more than the action. I can look at fictional gore like it doesn't matter, but it's the sounds produced that always get me. Seeing a man's life snuffed out by a plastic bag and hearing how slow and drawn out it is are two different things, at least to me. It's a cacophony of carnage that is damn fine to play at times. It all stems from that simple system I described. If you want to get the big kills, you need to put a bit of effort into it. Stalking targets is your main goal, but you can't be too short-sighted in your misery as you don't want a personal audience. Sometimes you have to sate yourself with only a bit of bloodshed before cashing in on the big payouts. Those payouts being the various gruesome executions. I could be here for a distressing while, picking which ones are my favorites, as some are enjoyably sadistic, but to save on time, the bat's gruesome execution is my favorite for a variety of reasons. 1. Massive head explosion. Well, actually only one reason, but that is all I need. I love a good headburst, and the bat over-delivers mostly because of two factors: explosion and aftermath. While it isn't to Scanner's level, the bat pulps the head completely, leaving a shower that you can see if you happen to be near a wall. As you admire the Jackson Pollock you've just made, looking back at the body reveals just how much you took off. That being the whole head. The other runners up to this would be landing a headshot with the shotguns or sniper rifle, but for as hard as Manhunt goes, it has a glaring issue that ties up half the game. If there was one thing I'm overtly peeved at, it would be the hard cut the game does into third-person shooting. The opening levels in Manhunt teach you extremely vital information. You ain't a hero, stick to the shadows, run if you're caught, and butcher those that have their backs turned to you. It's a solid setup for a stealth game, then Manhunt fucks it all up by introducing shootouts. I don't have a problem with enemies carrying guns. It adds a nice bit of tension, as while melee foes have to get in close range to off you, people with guns can do it from afar. These enemies punish any false steps made during stealth and quickly, as a single blast from a gun can shred Cash's health. Gun-toting thugs are a perfect counterbalance to sprinkle amongst melee-oriented groups, such as when the War Dogs introduce the Trank Rifle Hunters, but when you are forced into direct confrontation with giant groups of these enemies does Manhunt fall apart. First off, the shooting just isn't that interesting. It's standard stop and pop to the most mundane levels. You know how GTA around this era kinda had underwhelming shooting? It's like that, but at least with GTA, there were other things to do besides having to use shoot bangs. Here, not so much. Guns are woefully inaccurate except for the sniper and assault rifle, and this is with mouse aim, mind you, and damage calculation feels random at times. I can kill an enemy from a few feet away with the shotgun or give him a mosquito bite. Any handgun is a 3-shot body shot unless the game says different, I think. I don't know what causes this, so most of the time I went for headshots because it's the quickest way to kill anyone with a gun. This isn't even adding gun range to this awful equation. All guns except the sniper rifle have a limited range, so if you think you can be sneaky by landing a far-off headshot, sorry to burst your bubble. Be prepared to cower in a corner or stairwell gun drawn to shoot any unlucky bastard wanting to chase after you. It's the only strategy that's worthwhile. That's because going on the offensive is about as smart as running your hand into a saw blade. Remember, these enemies are set to max pain damage output, accuracy, and reaction time, and Cash isn't the sort of man who can shoot dodge. If you ain't in cover, your brains are probably splattered across the wall. Even if you are in cover, that's still probably the case because there just isn't a good way to approach enemies with guns when you're forced into a firefight. Enemies will reliably hit you in cover while you're trying to aim at them, so it's pick your poison. Do you want to recreate the rooftop shootout from Naked Gun 2, or would you much rather bite the bullet and run out into the open hoping to kill everyone quickly? That's even if the game gives you a choice. Sometimes Manhunt's like, deuces. You want cover? I want to have good third-person shooting, so I guess no one is happy. Graveyard Shift and Wrong Side of the Tracks might as well be built on that philosophy, especially in Graveyard Shift's later half where I question how I'm supposed to approach some of the more dug-in enemies. And don't get me started on the door traps. Going back to what I said in the gameplay, some enemies are programmed to not approach you in any sense of the word. They would much rather turtle like you are, leading to some of the most awkward encounters, and frustrating deaths I've ever had in a video game. Mouth of Madness is one of the key stages to this problem, as to reliably go through the level, you will need to blunder into some rooms where enemies will blast your head off. After blowing up the first tower's brick entrance and clearing it, you have to run through more corridors. Because this is a loud stage at this point in time, every hunter will know you are coming, leading to what I will call the war for the door. See, you can't knock doors open except with the shotgun, and even then they swing back shut after a few seconds. To open a door, you have to slam into it like the wrecking ball that Cash is. Presumably into his death, because there will always be a guy or three trained on the door waiting to pop a cap in his ass. The only way I got through this section was by tricking one of the idiots on the other side of the door into blasting it by slightly peeking my head in. And that's only because I knew what was on the other side of the door. For a number of these sections, I feel like I only passed because I had been grounded into the dirt enough times to memorize how the section went. Like, I didn't overcome the problem through clever thinking, I just brute forced it until the game gave in. This wouldn't be a problem if the game's tempo was like Hotlines, but it's obvious that Manhunt wants to be slow and methodical. What's funny is that the penultimate level almost reaches that, what with Manhunt gifting you the assault rifle, but even then I had to rely on corner traps and tricking the AI. The thing that stings to me the most is when Manhunt tries to merge the two playstyles together. Train to Kill is such an odd level in the listing, as it feels like Manhunt is going, no, I'm a stealth game. Promise. Here's a bunch of melee weapons in a wide open space to perform executions. What are you doing? No, don't use guns, even though the cops you'll kill give you more ammo for your guns, and if you get caught out in the open with a melee weapon, you're dead. It's a half-hearted attempt at a run back to remind you how good the game can be before shoving you into the corner and absorbing any remaining life essence you had by basically presenting the stealth option as a non-starter. A weird paradox is formed, as I don't like engaging with the shooting, but not only is it a safer bet, it kills faster than executions. I will say at this point in time, I was thoroughly annoyed with how the second half of Manhunt went that I didn't even attempt stealth, but with how many levels after View of Innocence focus on shooting, I felt that there was no reason for me to. Manhunt had given up its ghost by that point in time, and stealth seemed more optional or pointless, what with every enemy carrying some type of firearm. I can see why Manhunt has its cult status. When Manhunt gets it right, it's phenomenal. Slinking through the shadows like some jacked up Jack the Ripper is fun, as everything comes together. The atmosphere, the stealth-oriented gameplay, the presentation. But all that gets thrown out the window in the second half. Manhunt becomes what I'd consider my least favorite genre, and solely drowns in its mediocre performance of it. Then, as if to twist the knife, it tries to go for a mashup between the two styles that doesn't work. That's what makes Manhunt hard to recommend at the end of the day. It's like Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth in that regard. The standout moments are that, and there are plenty, but I feel like I'm island hopping across a vast sea of frustration that is Manhunt's third-person shooting. I would dare say that Manhunt is a Marajank, and because of that, I fully can't recommend the game. Still, it is available on Steam with what I used to get the game working in the description below, as well as on PlayStation 4. Now this is where I wonder if Manhunt 2 fixed my issues with the first one. I know for starters, the story, though this wasn't an issue for me in Manhunt 1, is a bit more forefront with government espionage and multiple personalities, and that guns have executions tied to them. There is still a worrying amount of shooting though, at least from what I saw, so I can't say otherwise. It was also more extreme than the first, as I also know it was heavily censored. The last piece of information I have on it is that the only way to get Manhunt 2 is through secondhand shops or yar-harring. Granted, it won't be my next game, as I have a different one in mind. Before I give my hints, however, friend of the show Kazan Rokuyari commented on the last video, hoping for an episode on Dead Island soon. We both know how funny that statement is, but let's just say perhaps after next video, you might be surprised. This showing of Manhunt is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving a Scooby-Doo gang, Sixth Senses, and a follow-up to a Dreamcast title.